Huge patch to get through. I've already read through it, so hopefully we can get through this pretty smoothly. There's some pretty significant changes, and I'll talk about some of the implications and what I think as we go. So let's go through the Illuvials first. So they've nerfed the Anteater line, just less dodge chance. I think they wanted to get rid of the potential that he becomes basically unkillable. And we'll see later Spore got nerfed as well. So they've changed the way Titanor the Beetle line works. So Titanor got a pretty big buff, so the energy costs of their Omegas have been reduced. The duration of the stun has been reduced for the Scarabox and the Goliant. However, the Titanor is still 3 seconds. It'll be casting faster, 3 seconds, and it also adds this damage reduction buff. And we'll see this is a bit of a theme where the Tier 3 Illuvial has been either not nerfed or buffed. So Titanor just got a whole lot tankier and cast faster now. The Turtle line got a buff. They were pretty weak, I thought, so that's a pretty good buff, just flat energy and physical resistance buff. And they tend to be in the Colossus build as well, so keep that in mind with Titanor. Kukuraf got a nerf. The attack range was too high, so you were able to sit behind your front line on your Kukuraf, so just allowing him to be too safe, which is a good nerf. And he was often a part of the Enchanter build as well, so kind of indirectly nerfing Enchanter there as well. The Elk line, not too much to speak on here. It's not hugely significant, just the cast time is now quicker, which I think is the biggest thing. Dash Rake and Umbra have had probably a bit of a nerf because the new formula, the attack damage isn't being multiplied by the Omega power anymore. So it's just the flat damage that is. So we'll see how that plays out. It's already kind of unplayable, but it's hard to say with all these augment changes that we'll go through. It's hard to say what Illuvials that'll affect the most. Potentially with the Umbra was getting countered by Mud quite a bit, and Siphon Matrix, which was reducing attack speed, and both of those have been nerfed, so we'll see. Maybe the Umbra become relevant again, despite this nerf. Pretty significant nerf to the Scorpion line, which I think the Ripe Lance was quite strong, so now it's costing double the energy cost to cast the Mega. It is doing more damage, but probably more significantly, flat damage, max health, and resistances have all been reduced on the Ripe Lance. I think Ripe Lance will still be good. You'll see a pattern here. Most things have been nerfed, so anything that's been nerfed pretty hard doesn't mean it's going to be out of the meta, especially with all the augment changes. I think probably what we'll see is Illuvials that aren't relying on augments as much to be strong become more relevant, and Rhyplants might be one of those, so we'll see. Speaking of those Illuvials, the Flare, Singed, and Seer have all had a flat damage increase. However, the formula is similar to the Umbra, where the flat damage is only multiplied by the Mega Power now, not the attack damage. However, I don't think this is as big a deal on the Seer and the Singed because the flat damage has been increased, and you're not really buffing him up with attack damage buffs anyway, whereas the Umbre you had that option. So I think I'd prefer this formula change and just have a stronger baseline. And we'll see Behemoth has also been buffed, so keep that in mind when you're trying to theory craft it. I think the Seer might be a good option. The energy resistance debuff for the Shrimp line no longer lasts 5 seconds after it's cast, so it's only while the beam is on the enemy. This is a pretty significant one. So the Pterodactyl line, the radius for all their Omegas has been reduced, so you'll need to be a bit more precise with these. However, Inferno, Phantom, Fire, Scion, everything else, Rogues, hasn't been changed, has been buffed as well. Laser Knight actually got a buff here. The knock-up duration is now longer, and the attack speed buff lasts longer as well as the debuff. So, and what we'll also note here is that this Blazer Knight, this attack speed buff, it says it affects allies, but we'll later see that all the Empath units that affect allies, it now affects the Illuvial themselves as well, besides Aegis. So I'm pretty sure this attack speed buff on Omega is going to be applied to the Blazer Knight as well. That's my understanding of it anyway, so a pretty big buff to the Blazer Knight. And we'll also see, I think there's a few other Wildfire buffs as well. Again, we've got the Stage 3 Illuvial either being buffed or not being nerfed, whereas the others have. Fury and Furiox have both had the splash radius reduced and the attack speed buff. So keep that in mind with Scoriox because although there's no changes to Magma, Behemoth has been buffed, which Seer obviously synergizes with Scoriox, so if that's the case where Behemoth is quite good, Scoriox will probably be in that team as well. Look at the Squid and the Snails at the same time because they both live in the Invoker team, and the Sephorus actually got a buff to the damage reduction when they Omega, or as they're Omegaing. But the Omega damage actually got nerfed. So maybe between Granite with the Sephorus and the Titanor, remember, got a buff, so potentially that's made Sephorus a bit more tanky. And even though there's less damage, the Ophisto usually lives in this team as well. And the Ophisto got buffed, so the cast time on the Omega is only 1.8 seconds now, so that's pretty significant, especially when he's casting twice. so he can get back to auto attacking quicker, potentially get those off before he dies, and kill something a little bit sooner before they have maybe that impact within that half a second. And remember the Titanor also got buffed, so interesting. We'll see with Invoker whether that becomes a bit more relevant again. We don't have Indomitables anymore, so that's an augment that Invokers somewhat relied on, but I guess most teams did rely on those augments, so it's hard to say who will be impacted by the augments the most. If you don't know what I'm talking about, we will get to the augments. The other thing to note here is that the Duelif got a buff. So the Duelif beam does a little bit more energy resistance reduction, and we'll also see later that Shock also gives, I'm pretty sure it's going to give more energy resistance debuff as well. So Invoker is looking pretty good at the moment, I think. Just depending on how affected they are by the augment changes. You know, potentially some, like I said, some Illuvials might be more affected by the augment changes. Huge debuff to the Cardilogs, or this whole line of the Water Buffaloes. This is what I was referring to before with the Blazonite in the Wildfire build. Blazonite got a buff, the Blotto and the Front got a buff. They're both Wildfire units, so the blind duration just lasts a little bit longer, which is not a bad thing. That blind can be pretty powerful. Keep in mind that Omega not only blinds, but anyone within the cloud of that Omega also gets a damage reduction. So that's obviously just stayed the same. Terror Bird, the Phosphorus, they all got nerfed. We'll see later, Fighter also got nerfed, and so did Bloom. Interestingly, the attack range got nerfed here, so maybe the Phosphorus can't be as safe as it normally is. The Omega Wit also got nerfed, which is huge. The cost got buffed, or nerfed, it now costs more, and the Omega damage. So a few patches in a row, Phosphorus has been nerfed, and we'll see the augment that gives him immunity has also been nerfed. So I think they've nerfed it enough, and the augment's enough where it's moved away from being that unkillable bird, especially since you can't have immune uptime as much anymore. But we'll see. I still think it'll be relevant, especially if the Seer and the Magma build comes back into popularity again. Phosphorus will still be there, and it's still a really good Illuvial. The Monk Ears have got nerfed, Mega Radius reduced a little bit, and the attack damage percentage boost, every third of attack I think it was, has been reduced as well. Still will scale hard with the Berserker, so this is a decent nerf, but it won't bring the Monk Ear out of irrelevance. Although with the Ripe Lance nerf as well, yeah, we'll see. Probably a good premeditated nerf to these Berserker Illuvials, especially given that we'll actually see the sword on the Ranger get a buff. So your Ranger can become the third Berserker, and that's actually gotten a buff. So we'll see how all that plays out. Kling got a bit of a nerf, so his knock-up duration is only 1 second now. Where the Null, the stage 3, is still the same. So again, that pattern of the stage 3 getting an indirect buff. Polar Bear line, pretty big buff here. So there's one thing you don't see in this chart is that the Polar Bear steals now all attack damage types rather than just physical, and the steal duration has been buffed as well for the stage 2 and stage 3. Keep in mind they're also Behemoth, which we'll see also got a buff, and they're also stealing more missing health, so big buff there. Oh, and Frost also gets a buff, so which we will see now. Jotun could become a bit of a powerhouse. So this is what I was talking about earlier. All the synergies that are formed from Empath are now applied to self as well. So when they say allied, they're also applying it to themselves, except Aegis. So that's probably referring to their Blazonite as well, with that attack speed boost. Through the frost buff, so activation time, so quicker frost stuns. The frost radius is bigger, and the blind radius is now bigger as well. I'm pretty sure the blind is when they first land, and Bloom has been nerfed. So they've actually removed the health regen buff, and they're now receiving much less max HP and a mega power. You can see the description there. So Phosphorus will no longer be scaling as quickly into that unkillable Illuvial. Frost has probably had a buff here, even though you can see the Omega power debuff is less. It now applies when they Omega and when they finish their Omega. Spore been nerfed, so less heals and dodge. We saw the Vermilion getting nerfed as well. I think they're just trying to avoid that power point where they become unkillable. Tsunami, pretty significant nerf here, especially since it can synergize with Enchanter. We've also got Mud being nerfed as well. Ranger and the Gorilla all got a nerf in regards to how much energy gain they get on hit. Toxic Radius has been nerfed, and the activation time has been increased. So the Toxic Colossus Opener has well and truly been nerfed. So was Ripe Lance. So Wildfire did get a buff as well here. So not only did the Blazonite get a buff, he's also stacking attack speed buffs on himself now. The Blotto got a buff to that blind duration, and Wildfire damage has also increased. Now this was only really good because Empaths were broken at the time, so we'll see how this plays out. I think there'll be some more unique builds with Wildfire in it. It won't just be that Empath stacking on each other, or it might be, but it won't be as OP as it used to be. So I think these are good changes. And we see the shock energy resistance debuff has been increased, so Invokers I think will make a bit of a comeback, just depending on how the augments affect them. Fighter has been nerfed, I think that's a good move. It's still going to be strong, but it was at that 7 fighter, it was pretty busted. So good change there. Empath has been buffed. I think this is just probably bringing them back in line a little bit. All the individual empaths are still nerfed from the last patch, which was probably the most significant thing. So I think this is a good move because we don't want empath to be unplayable. Bulwarks have been nerfed pretty heavily. Scion also nerfed recently. Enchanter, okay, so Enchanter did actually get a nerf. The pure damage radius has been reduced a little bit. The shield reduced a little bit, and yeah, the shield reduced. So the pure damage is still the same. It won't be able to be cast as much because Tsunami got nerfed. The Kukuraf got nerfed, the Gauntlet got nerfed, so hopefully Enchanter will still be playable, but it won't be as OP as it is at the moment. Mystic Shield also getting nerfed a little bit. The attack speed is still the same though, so Mystic will still be very, very good. Invokers nerfed, so they won't be stacking each other with the Mega Power as much, but it'll still be a very good composite. And Templar also got nerfed a bit, but resistances aren't as easy to get anymore because Bulwark has been nerfed, so huge buff to Behemoth. So they have a new effect they're going to cleanse, so let's just read that. Every 4th attack, Behemoth's units deal increased damage, stun the target, and cleanse. So they'll get rid of, say, Toxic, any attack speed debuffs, Mud, and they're gaining more physical damage off their max health. Interesting change to Vanguard, so there's a new effect. They get a shield on crit. So Vanguard units gain crit chance. On crit, they gain a shield for 5 seconds. On takedown, they enrage, they take less damage, they taunt the enemies in a medium area. So the shield is not bad. I think if that's on every crit, you could probably get them to like 70% crit chance, and then they're taking less damage when they do eventually get a takedown. So pretty decent for Vanguard, especially if we look over who the Vanguards are. Malura, pretty strong unit on its own, but the other Vanguards are also Frost. Frost got a buff, Vanguard got a buff, and we will see how that fits into some of the teams. Slashin could become a bit of a beast, I think. Legendary Augment bidding phase has 3 changes. So the bidding phase will always display legendaries as follows. So there'll be 1 synergy augment, 2 legendaries, and then 1 random. So it could be a second synergy augment. And these won't repeat. So you can see here, if there's one of these show up in phase 1, they're not going to show up in the second phase. So there'll be more variety. Those synergy augments, so when they say synergy augments, they can, you could come up with a Frost or Vanguard or whatever. They'll be tailored to the player's team. So it looks like there'll be more of a chance that 2 of them can pop up, and they'll be more relevant to the team comps. So could see that play into a little bit more scenarios where even if you're in an unfavorable matchup, there'll be those decisions you can make whether to stop them getting their synergies, try get your own synergies, and it might mix things up a little bit. Now there's a lot of augment changes. We can just assume that all the augments have been nerfed. And probably the biggest thing I missed, that you can now only have 1 augment per line, can be added to your team builder. So only 1 charge capacitor, you can only pick either stage 1, 2 or 3, and that's all you can add to your team builder. And obviously that's all you can play. So no more stacking suppressors, no more stacking of the same augments. I won't run through these all, but in general, they've all been nerfed, but there's less power in the augments. I'll just show you a couple of significant changes. So the Quantum Reservoir, instead of getting flat energy on Omega, you now get a percentage of the energy cost on Omega. Graviton Piercer now triggers after 6 attacks, and that can either give you true sight or attack speed. So no more piercing resistances. Hyper Endurance Matrix has been changed to be able to either give your team energy resistance, or energy or physical resistance. I should say energy and physical resistance, or just the holder of the augment. So Bulwark got nerfed, and I think probably this will be an augment that everyone takes. And remember, you can only have 1 of them, so you probably take stage 3 and give your whole team 12 resistance. Parasitic Link now only affects 1 Illuvial, so it affects yourself, the holder. You'll gain some Omnivamp, and 1 ally next to you will gain an increase, so up to 20 Omnivamp. Reactive Deflector also got nerfed, so this was the Invulnerable. So no more Invulnerable, it's going to take less damage at the start of combat instead. Suppressors got nerfed, which is good for Invokers again. Temporal Safeguard we've already mentioned previously when we're talking about the Phosphorus. It's every 2 Omegas now instead of every Omega. Stage 1 isn't going to cleanse, but the immune duration is going to be 4 seconds. And Stage 3 is going to cleanse, last 4 seconds for the immunity, or you could pick the damage reduction. Actually, by the looks of it, you gain all of these bonuses. I don't know if that's a typo or... But keep in mind, probably the 2 Illuvials that use this the most were Rhyplants and Phosphorus, whose both Omegas now cost more as well. So it's every 2 plus their Omegas cost more. Photonic Unity, you can no longer gain you no longer gain the energy every 4 seconds, I think it was, or the crit chance. So, okay, this might be a typo because pretty sure this should be bonus too. The crit chance and crit amp were in the same bonus, and the mega power energy gain. So maybe it gives it probably more chance that this damage reduction is a typo, and that's a second bonus. But you're no longer gaining that energy from the photonic unity, so not great for someone like the Invoker again. However, Suppressor's got nerfed. I would probably take the Suppressor nerf over keeping this if you're an Invoker team. This is the Survival Protocol nerf we talked about. So this triggers at 25% now, 25% HP, and you just cleanse and take reduced damage instead of the Indomitable, which I think is a healthy change. So it'd still be good if you want someone to live towards the end. But interestingly, second bonus you can select, instead of gaining a shield, you can gain damage and the cleanse, which on stage 3 is 100% more damage at 25% HP, which be pretty huge. Or at least be fun to watch. See how good it is, but yeah, that's going to be fun. Gloves. So the Gauntlet has been nerfed pretty heavily, and the sword, so this is the one that can go into Berserker or Fighter, has been buffed. So you get more stats with max health, and you're going to be doing more physical damage. It's not a huge amount, but depending on how the meta goes, it could be a big deal. The water weapons in general have been nerfed, so this is just for the starting energy and the energy cost. So that's going to be a nerf to Gauntlet as well. And it looks like they've probably, hopefully, addressed all those desync issues and a lot of the major bugs, and we all want that. Let me know what you think. Off the top of my head, I'm thinking maybe Colossus will be decent again. I don't know if you'll put a Blazer Knight in there, but Wildfire seems like it'll make a resurgence. I think we'll have to find a different team other than Empaths maybe to put the Blaze Knight in and Wildfire. But maybe with the buff to Achilleon, Titanor, you might have some kind of an Aegis. Given that their Blotto is Aegis, you might have some kind of a Wildfire Aegis Colossus build. And I think Invoker will be very good again. Rhamphyre, I can't see being that good anymore, although Fire might be really good. So maybe you have Rhamphyre in for a really late game option, but you go Fire early, just because there's no more Indomitable. The Vitality Veil got nerfed, and the starting energy gain augments have also been nerfed, which all of those you really need on the Rhamphyre, otherwise he just never casts. I'm interested to see how Behemoth plays out with Scoriox and Magma again, as well as Frost. Frost Vanguard will be interesting as well. It's definitely got a big buff, but we'll see how good it actually is in practice. And then just with all the augment changes, I think it just changes up the way a lot of these illuvials will work. So maybe the ones that are less reliant on augments will be better, and some of the ones we think will be OP might be not that good because we didn't realize how much they were relying on those augments. But let me know what you think down below, and make sure to hit the like button, and we'll see you next time.